warm welcome to this event, and we are here for commemorating 40th anniversary, but is celebrating it in the form of a series of lectures. The first one we had in Geneva with the DG of WTO. This is the second one. To commence the proceedings, may I invite our distinguished guest, Shri Amitabh Kant, Sherpa of G20. And I invite Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi, DG of RIS, and Shri Pradeep Mehta, Secretary General of CUTS International and Chairman of CIRs.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Navneet. And with that, let me warmly welcome all of you. And particularly what I see is in the audience, a very large number of distinguished civil servants as well as old friends who I value very highly. In my 40 years of career, I've interacted with a very large number of you. And today I have the pleasure of having two of very friendly, affectionate civil servants par excellence, I would say. Amitabh Kant and Harsh Shringla. Unfortunately, Harsh could not come, but we'll probably hear him through a tape message. Therefore, it is a very solemn occasion for us, the way that we are celebrating our 40th anniversary. As Navneet said, this is the second of the series of the events that we are organizing around the world. The first one was held in Geneva on April 6 with the Director General of the WTO, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, and that again was an excellent occasion. We had a interactive chat. It was a fast kind of thing, which is what Amitabh has asked me to do instead of turning it into a lecture series, and I'll be happy to do that. But before that, let me give you a bit of a background about CUTS. We started in 1983 with a zero budget out of a garage in my little flat that I had. And since then, we have grown organically. Rather than without any mentors or rich supporters or something, just sheer hard work. I hope it is not immodest to say that on myself. But then what has happened, and there are a large number of comments which we received from people from the first lecture itself, that this is a model which other NGOs should replicate. So we are both a think tank and an action tank. We are not just a think tank. Whatever work we do it with a purpose. And even these series of lectures that we're doing follows a series of lectures which we did in the year of our 30th anniversary. And the same was published as a book, which is available on our website. And what we are doing is we are religiously following all the advices given in these lectures by eminent people like Amitabh and Harsh. And let me also acknowledge my friend Sachin Chaturvedi, who has been with us since long on many of our events. Now, the purpose of this is that how we can chalk out a future strategy for the next 10 years at least. And how will it shape out, particularly from the issues, fortunately and fortuitously. I would say this G20 event, which is happening now, has come in as a kind of a shake-up event, particularly among the policy circles. There's huge amount of churning which is going around, not only in the policy circles, but including in the official circles. What we are looking at is also something is to take it beyond India, India, Brazil, South Africa. We're looking at it as a part of the global South's agenda, which was so clearly elucidated by Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi when he did the event on Global South. Uh, how do we as civil society add substance to it, add weight to it, and so on? Because there is an important role of civil society in this world, which has been recognized, and this is what we've been doing since the year 1983. We got into international economic issues in 1991 when the Uruguay round of the WTO was at its peak. And therefore, some of our work in the area of trade policy is probably one of the most recognized in the world as a civil society organization. Another area of our work is on competition law and policy. We have been in the vanguard of promoting competition reforms in the developing world, including about 27 developing countries, which have been documented. also. Now, we are also doing work at the grassroots with women and children. We're running 50 farmer producer organizations now, another initiative of Honorable uh, Prime Minister, which I think will show some good results as time flows by. There are a lot of good things happening in the country, and we hope to advance them to the best extent possible. Uh, and therefore, we're using this particular opportunity to get some more ideas, particularly from a dynamo like Amitabh Kant, who I have nicknamed as Amitabh Adrenaline Kant. With that, over to you, Amitabh. Can you make a few opening remarks and then we'll pose you some questions? By the way, let me tell you, there's a larger audience on YouTube than what we see here. We of course have, fortunately, a very quality audience today, and not numbers but quality, yes, and larger audience out in YouTube. When we did the event with Ngozi, we had about 150 people in the room and over 500 people on YouTube. And I think we have over 200 people on YouTube today. So over to you, Amitabh.
So Pradeep, Sachin, many distinguished people who are sitting here, very, very distinguished people, Mr. Damu Ravi, Mr. Nambiar, Mr. and Mrs. Ghosh, Mr. Katwa, Mr. Harshvardhan Singh, many, many people I know, very Arun Goel, who are part of this audience. So first of all, I'd like to compliment Pat and Pradeep, you for your tremendous energy, enthusiasm, vitality, energy, everything. I mean, you keep going against all odds. So you bring a lot of life and energy. And I think you inspire many of us all the time. So uh, you are like a bootstrapped startup who's grown and expanded without much help from many other sources. And so my compliments to you, and you've done path-breaking work, particularly in the field of trade. Uh, Cuts is very critical and significant at a point of time when there is so much of protectionism, which will impact both growth and our ability to lift below poverty line. And actually, people do not realize this, but trade has lifted vast segments of population above the poverty line. But every time you have a pandemic, historically, if you look at it, next 5 years, you have protectionism, and that's what we are seeing in play today. And a great example of that is what the United States of America has done through the Inflation Reduction Act and CHIPS Act, which are very classic case of great protectionist acts, actually. And this will lead to uh, slowing down of global growth. And I, if once uh, in India's own case, if you look at it, every time we've grown only when exports have grown. So if exports don't grow, it'll be very difficult for countries to grow, and that'll have a huge impact. As it is, the cost of living crisis across the world, and the crisis of the pandemic has put 200 million people below the poverty line, and over 100 million people have lost their jobs in the world. And you have a scenario where 75 countries are facing a global debt crisis. One third of the world is in recession, and Germany, just 2 days back, has gone into recession. So I foresee recession in large parts of Europe, and this will hamper this will have huge impact, and therefore the challenge before, to my mind, at this point of time is nothing else but very inclusive, resilient, sustainable growth. And only when you have growth, you'll be able to lift people above poverty line. And it's also important to realize that we are at the midway point of the Sustainable Development Goals, which were to be implemented by 2030. Only 13% of the outcomes have been achieved. And actually, instead of progressing because of the pandemic, we have regressed very poorly. So those are challenges. And there's a crisis of climate action, and you'll need a vast amount of resources to flow in. So you have a scenario where actually the financial policies pursued by the developed world has led to huge, the monetary policies have led to huge amount of liquidity, which has led to high interest rates, which have led to actually resources from emerging markets flowing from resources from emerging markets flowing to the developed part of the world. Whereas all the growth in the coming years will come from emerging markets and not from the developed part of the world. And the policies being pursued by uh, uh, multilateral institutions have not been able to manage the global financial architecture. They've not been able to manage global inflation. So these are the challenges before the world, and I'll be happy to respond to. I would prefer that it's an inter. I can go on and on and on for a long time, but I think it's better that we convert it into a lively, vibrant uh, interactive session, and it'll be in tune with the philosophy of cuts rather than
Thank you very much.
rather than doing monologues.
No, no, thank you. Thank you for inviting my interruption. You spoke about, I mean, the title that we looked at in terms of your talk was on jobs, infrastructure, and inclusion. Inclusion is a big challenge today in a world which is becoming more and more exclusive. How do you think, in terms of, I mean, if you look at the way multilateralism is shaping up, if it is shaping up well at all, it is not. And that is what is it that we can send out as a message from Delhi at the end of this year or the G20 summit?
So I think the challenge before the world, as far as multilateralism is concerned, is firstly that many of the multilateral financial institutions which were created in the post World War II era were Bretton Woods institutions which were designed for another era. And today's era, which is basically about financing for climate action and financing for sustainable development goals, are really the key challenges. And they are not designed for that. It's not that there is a shortage of resources in the world. The total amount of liquidity available in the world is close to about $350 trillion. About $150 trillion are available with institutional funds, pension funds, etc., which want to finance and support infrastructure creation, want to support climate action, want to support SDGs. The challenge is that you have different risks in different parts of the world, and therefore you are able to get lending at in developed part of the world at 2%. You get financing in uh, countries like India, emerging markets like India, at about 8%. In Africa, you get it at about 16%. Sub-Saharan countries, you get it about 22%. So the risks are different, and I think the challenge really is to de-risk many of these regions of the world and de-risk them looking at a global perspective. And secondly, do a lot of very good, sophisticated, de-risked project development, which is not happening. Now, project development means about almost 8 to 10% of the project fund going in for de-risking projects. That is not happening. So, uh, the second challenge is that private sector funds are available. They are available in large amounts and large quantities. They'll not flow in unless and until multilateral institutions are not able to create, not able to do more lending through blended finance. You need new institutions like credit, first loss guarantees, credit enhancements. All these are critical instruments in today's world. Well, I think MEGA of World Bank has to play a much bigger, much greater role in due course. All this is not happening. The World Bank institutions, the multilateral institutions, the staff is is incentivized to do direct lending rather than pooling resources and doing co-financing, and rather than bringing in partnership with the private sector. So that is really the key to my mind, and that is what was recommended by the eminent group, which was headed by Tharman of Singapore, who was the deputy prime minister of Singapore earlier. 5 years back, it didn't take place. Janet Yellen has been talking about it now from the United States, because the US financial policies actually have led to inflation and have led to increased interest rates, which has led to resources flowing. So they feel now that it's important that multilateral institutions should support emerging markets. That's the language they are talking. But this would require a huge amount of play. The new encasing committee and Larry Summers' report will come out by the end of June, first week of July, etc. That will be the first tranche of it. So let's see. But that making recommendations, writing reports is one part of it. Actually, cracking it into implementation is the key part, and that is critical, and that is important. The other is important thing to realize is that uh, in today's world, I mean, if you look at India's economy, it's 3.5 trillion. The World Bank lending is just 3 billion in India. So it doesn't matter what the kind of lending it is doing. If you look at overall the total lending of the Chinese banks put together with AIIB and the new bank, they do more lending than what World Bank and the IMF the window that they have. They do more lending than that. So institutions like the Paris Club, which was built over the years by France because they were supporting African countries and they still think they will manage global debt, have become irrelevant. You, the Paris Club lending to some countries, they control global debt, but they are irrelevant because over the last few years, the lending by the Chinese banks and Chinese institutions to African countries and the private sector lending to these countries is enormously much more, and that is what the Chinese are saying, that we need to take a make a play have a critical role in final decision making rather than the Paris Club deciding this. And what they're saying is right, actually. So they need to be brought on board. And these are challenges of the global financial architecture, international financial architecture right now.
Thank you, Amitabh. Just a little house announcement. Since Amitabh has to go for the new Parliament House inauguration. No, he spent time. Thank you very much. But there was a tape of Harsh Shingla, which I think we can play after this. But the question is, Amitabh, the point which you raised is something which need reflection. That if multilateralism has to succeed, we cannot ignore China. Unfortunately, both Jake Sullivan and Janet Yellen have spoken that you cannot decouple China. And the fact is that China has a huge amount of investment in US bonds. So I don't know what is the kind of geopolitics. Sachin, would you like to comment on that?
Thank you. Thanks, Pradeep ji. And I join Shrimitav ji in congratulating you for cuts. And I think it's a great contribution. It has filled in a huge space. And some of us who have been following your work from early 90s and particularly at the Cancun WTO ministerial, the role that cuts played is known to everyone. So I think congratulations for that. Following back on the point that Sherpa made just now, I think one point that is important here is also to realize the fact that, and that's what probably my question would be to Sherpa, in terms of if we are on the cuts platform and trade doesn't come up, it would not fit in well. And that's where sir, I wanted to ask you this whole emphasis that you made and also guided Ministry of Agriculture to come up with the paper on food security, and your emphasis right from day one. Fortunately, RIS was involved as knowledge partner, so we prepared that. But as the issues are emerging, we have not made much emphasis on trade, which is very much our emphasis when it comes to WTO. And WTO has expanded in several areas over the last couple of years, though things have not moved. But when it comes to G20, food security has a huge implication because we have to export. It was on President Biden's personal request that Prime Minister encouraged states which are growing wheat, and we helped Egypt. It was done, though the peace clause, etc., have not been turned into the assets that we wanted. So, how you see those issues which are related to trade, but so crucially connected with global food security? After the Ukraine war, almost 25 countries have knocked the door of IMF for support, financial support for food security. There are 38 countries which are facing huge food crisis, and that has multiplied over the months. So something that is so crucial is still countries are not leaving the old positions at WTO. G20 is not the platform to turn that into anything else. But how you are dealing with this major problem, which agriculture working group I'm sure is grappling with, but it would definitely get escalated at Sherpa's level because US and particularly Europe would have a very different position. On your point, Pradeep ji, on this idea of financial crisis that is coming in. And as Sherpa mentioned, the idea of France becoming irrelevant with the Paris Club, what they are now trying to do, and fortunately some of us are part of that initiative, which President Macron has launched for last 8 months, is to have dialogue with China, to bring in at least some banks of China on board. And fortunately, 3 of them have come on board, and they are participating in the forthcoming June summit, where India is also a partner. And they are trying to address some part of their loan to be co-opted in the Paris Club. So this development is happening, but all that we calculated with Homi Kharas and his team, and we have found that it would be something like 18% of the total credit that China has given to Africa. So that is something which is important. Coming on Africa, and again, I would congratulate Cuts for this great role you have played in Africa. Your office is in Africa. I think you are the only think tank, action tank in Africa. And I think it would be important for us, the kind of emphasis PM has laid.
Indian think tank.
Indian think tank, Indian think tank. Others are there, very much there. Particularly an Indian also, others are there. In the economics profession, probably you were the first one. IFT has also opened their campus. So now I think the emphasis on global south from that perspective is also equally important. Fortunately, Ministry of External Affairs now has made up their mind of going ahead with Prime Minister's idea of having a center of excellence for global south. And fortunately, MEA has decided that to be based at RIS. So we would be partnering with you. Incidentally, RIS is also getting set from June onwards to celebrate our 40 years. So that is also going to be there. But so my question to you and to
Thank you.
Mr. Sen.
Thank you. Amitabh, over to you before I turn. Shall we open the floor? Yeah. Okay.
should listen to
Yeah.
like Ghosh.
Please do introduce yourself for the sake of record,
Sir,
because we are
Namaskar.
on YouTube also.
Sir, Namaskar. I am Professor N.K. Goyal, Chairman of Telecom Equipment Manufacturing Association. I have a vested question. Is there any impact of G20 on our stakes of Digital India telecom technology products? Thank you.
Few questions. Okay. Yeah, the piche.
Vijay Mathur, long retired chairman of the Airports Authority in Maruti. You very rightly pointed out that we need investment. And the real key, as we all know from investment, you with your background in industry know it firsthand, is you need investors' trust. And you need investments confidence that the policy framework on which they're making large investments in long projects will go through. And the problem there is, as you rightly pointed out, policy making is not the issue. Policy making is top level. You see increasingly with the information revolution that policy making has become very reasoned and very logical and supported with a lot of data. But what is the problem? The problem is rising political acrimony. And that's really an implementation. You and I have been in government, we know firsthand how much of implementation is sabotaged by political acrimony. And forget India, you look at across the world, you mentioned the US. Is the G20 looking at the issue? How do you dial down political acrimony? Because, in my opinion, that's the elephant in the room, not policy making.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, please. Here.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Anil Handa. On buy now, pay later, would you like to say something? And also the write-offs on the US on educational loans. Would you like to say something?
Damu, would you like to comment? No. Vijay? Yeah.
Thank you. I'd just like to share
Introduce yourself for the record.
Vijay Nambiar, retired diplomat. Thank you. I'd like the Sherpa to comment on the role that civil society can play, particularly in terms of the financial, how to build up greater degree of support for action. It also appears as if there have been suggestions from civil society for greater representation in the UN in terms of various modalities, civil society, envoy, etc. Some of it seems unviable, but Is there any role from the G20 as well as from the UN? Is there any role that civil society can play that is more, in a sense, in tune with the realities of the developing realities? Thank you.
Well, let me first start with this question on the digitization bit, because digital transformation is very, very critical. And if you have to make a major impact on poverty or SDG, then digital transformation will play a key role. And India's put that right in forefront as one of its key priorities, as well as on what we've done through the digital public infrastructure. Is we've been able to build an alternative model. I mean, most technological innovations happen on account of the developed world, and they've happened in the last 2 3 decades on account of uh, big tech, Google, Facebook, Apple, uh, Amazon, and in the case of China, because of Tencent and Alibaba. But they've happened because they had access to the data of the citizens, and they were able to use AI and machine learning to push a lot of innovation. In the case of Europe, it was GDPR, which was focusing on privacy, and therefore it has had an impact on innovation, and innovation has not really had a huge uh, impetus in Europe in the last few years. But in India, what we did was that we created the railway tracks. We created on the public layer, which was the digital identity, and then we allowed private sector to innovate on top of the layers, on top of the public layer, which was really a public interest layer. So we did the digital identity first, and then between 2015 and 2017, we opened about 500 million bank accounts, which is about 55% of the bank accounts opened across the world. Every second bank account was opened in India. And then we linked up the bank account with both the Aadhaar number and the mobile number. And then we enabled everybody to do fast payment, and mobile became the virtual bank. So what has actually happened in India is that during that period, the cost of acquisition of a customer in India radically fell, which was about $30 per customer, had come down to $1 per customer. And that's exactly why a new company like Geo could acquire about 250 million customers in about 100 days. The cost of acquisition of a customer because of paperwork, etc., in the United States of America and Europe is over about $100. In India, is as low as $1. You can open a bank account using just your bank biometric in 1 second, and our digital payments take just about 30 seconds. So we are doing about 11x digital payments of what USA and Europe do. We do about 4x of what China does. But we've created other layers, other deep digital public infrastructure like DigiLocker. We've created the Cowin, we created Diksha, we created Swayam. No, if you look around the world, there are 4 billion people who do not have a digital identity. 2.5 billion people do not even have a bank account. 133 countries in the world do not have a fast payment. So I think what India's view is that this model of digital public infrastructure needs to be taken across the world to transform lives of citizens, because during the COVID period, India could put money into the bank accounts of almost 800 million people directly without any leakages. And therefore, we could, instead of giving large packages, we could reach money straight into their bank account. And I think that's a model which needs to be taken around the world. A lot of innovative work has been done by Triple IIT Bangalore. Because of MOSPI, you can do innovation on digital identity based on the prevailing circumstances of that particular country. We now need to unleash our private sector to take it out. And the challenge really is to get the world to accept DPI as a model now across the world, because this is the only model which will actually work to transform lives of citizens on population scale at low cost. Uh, in G20, we'll do our best, because the challenge there is that you have the challenge of the big tech in USA. G20 is a consensus driven body. but we'll do our best to push this model across the world, and that's the digital transformation model from India emerging. On civil society organization, let me tell you that I'm a great believer that civil society organizations have to play a very key and critical role. G20 envisages that through its vast number of engagement groups. So you have Business 20, you have Civil 20, you have Think 20, and some of them have done outstanding work in India. All of them have done outstanding work in India. Mr. Nambiar is associated with the Civil 20, which is doing very good work. The Think 20 has done outstanding work with which Sachin has been associated. You have Business 20, with which Mr. Chandrasekhar of Tata Sons is associated, which has done path-breaking work in India. So India's engagement groups have been very good, outstanding. And the second notable feature of India's G20 presidency has been that instead of restricting G20 to one city or two cities, we've taken it out and we've done it in 60 cities. And that has enabled the states to participate in a big way. We've made it more people centric. States have done a very good job. The cultural components has been very high because of the states putting forth its cultural brands and a lot of local cuisine, a lot of local art forms, and we've spread it all over India. That's been the differentiating factor of India's GDP, India's G20.
Thank you very much, Amit. Damu, would you like? Are you? Do you want to ask a question?
No, no.
A comment?
No,
Comment from you since you are there. I'm so grateful that you came.
first of all, congratulations for Cuts, and it's a great honor for me to be also associated with today's event. And Mr. Kant is one of the leading the G20 from from the front. There is so much we are beginning to understand the narrative within G20. How do we articulate it from the developing countries' point of view? I think this has been missing for a long time in the G20 deliberations, and India has taken a lead, and Mr. Kant is doing extraordinary work on that front. I think world is beginning to understand that development from the developing countries' perspective is what needs to be in the forefront. I think women-led development, including the digitally enabled technologies that are low-cost solutions, which are making transformations in the way the nations would need to find their own solutions. I think that is very key thing here, and very interesting way India is taking the lead. And we are also beginning to see the same kind of thinking sinking into G7. They're just coming from the Hiroshima. I was there last week with Prime Minister, and I think India's thinking is also sinking in across the world. I just want to leave this thought here. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Just one quick response. We have done a paper for G20 for T20 on bringing development into the WTO, which is a very crucial issue.
Yeah.
And Amitabh, let me also tell you one thing which we are very proud of. We are involved with T20, C20, and B20 also. Looking at our Africa work, they have invited us to join the Council for African Integration also, for example. So we're very proud for being very deeply immersed in this whole process, and we're enjoying it. Any other question? Yes, please.
Yeah.
Please identify yourself.
I am Arun Goyal. I'm presently member of the Central City Regulatory Commission. So I would just like to know about what is the thinking in G20 on the job front. I mean, today's topic is also there. So especially like in the India, the major growth had come from the services sector, that also from the IT sector. Now we see the recessions in the developed world and their investments into the IT are reducing at a very rapid rate. And we are seeing that there's a lot of downsizing by the Indian big 4 or 5 IT tech companies also. So in that scenario, I mean, how do we really look at jobs coming in India and what is the normal thinking at a global level about the jobs?
Thank you. You?
I think, as Sherpa said, three of our engagement groups have proactively engaged in terms of how employment strategy is to be built up. And as Pradeepji was mentioning, the Task Force 1 in the Think 20 T20 is focusing on livelihood security. And this livelihood security is being addressed from three different perspectives. One is the growing informalization, a challenge within the OECD countries. So OECD has come up with two position papers on how this informalization is going to affect, and that is an issue that G20 is grappling with right from Argentinian presidency, and it has in last three presidencies has been one of the areas. So if you see the G20 declarations, there are two paragraphs which are on informalization of jobs and the challenges that are coming in, how ILO and others are handling, but how the social security nets have to come up. So that's one part of it. The second is more in terms of how the gig economy is coming up. What are the challenges they are posing? The T20 in India is addressing not only these two, but the third part also, which is to bring in youth and skilling. So that's one big deficit. All the three countries, India, Brazil, and South Africa, they're going to face. So the task force where Pradeep ji was talking about is basically ensuring this. And there are a couple of our labor economists from VV Giri National Institute, Alak Sharma and his group. They all are associated with T20 to contribute. This is one part of the story. The two other task forces. One is the C20, which has come up with a major strategy in terms of what role local institutions can play in terms of job creation. We had one consultation in Tin Murti Bhavan with C20 where we discussed these issues. The third, which is much larger, is the role that CII has done. And CII has focused again on four dimensions of this major challenge of job creation. One that CII is focusing on as Secretariat for B20 is to focus on what new jobs and what new skills. And that's where they are trying to bring in lots of the discussions which were there on gig economy, but also trying to see how manufacturing is to be pushed in and what kind of jobs are needed for that. The second component which CII has addressed, which I think is absolutely important for almost all developing countries, is to provide a large number of fellowships that are needed for skilling. And that's where the budget allocations, the role that UNIDO and others have to play is what CII is talking about. The third component, which is more about the value chains, how specific entities have to be encouraged in terms of becoming part of the global value chains. And this is where role for Africa, etc., is being discussed beyond G20. So that's a title of the paper that CIA has come up with. And beyond G20, they are trying to bring in Africa. They are trying to bring in some of the Southeast Asian countries, including ASEAN, for that. The fourth component that CII paper addresses, which is, I think, quite interesting, is to see the impact of new technologies, the AI and many others, as to what is their impact and how this should be enabled. So, in my view, the G20 presidency of India, along the engagement groups, is addressing these various dimensions that I just mentioned. Within the official track, there are discussions within the finance track far more substantive in terms of how the recession that Sherpa just alluded to is to be addressed, and that I think would be important in terms of a huge meltdown that we are seeing in the finance sector.
Thank you very much. And let me just reflect from what Sachin just spoke about in terms of the jobs. The engagement group in B20, we are actively engaged with that. We are also, how do you call it, co-chair or member or what have you. Not only that, we have also conceptualized a project to work on all these issues across the three countries, India, Brazil, and South Africa. And that's what I was talking to Damu again, that it requires an IPSA push. Because IPSA has also been working on it, except that it has become a little dormant. So that has to be revived, which is what he told me, that finally the government is thinking of reviving IPSA. So this is a project that we're looking at in order to bring in some substantive dialogue within these three countries, in order to, as you rightly said, India, Brazil, South Africa all face these problems. That is what we recognize, and we request your support for this particular project. There's another IPSA project that we are looking at is on climate resilient infrastructure. Again, India, Brazil, and South Africa. Um, any other questions? Yes, please.
Sir, I'm Sumir Basin. I would like to know about the geopolitical impact on de-dollarization. And in respect of India, we are talking about propping the rupee, but structurally we have trade imbalances, as we say in the case of Russia. We have promoted the rupee trade, but there is a problem of a huge trade imbalance, which has even grown further during the last 1 year. So how do we address that?
Thank you. The gentleman next to you.
Morning, sir. I'm General Pavan Anand. Served in the Army for 36 years. I've been Secretary General of the Highway Operators Association, and I'm currently with the think tank, USI of India. Two questions, sir, both addressed to Amitabh Kanji. What I observed in the infrastructure sector, sir, is that there's a lot of funds waiting on wings, wanting to come into investment into infrastructure in India, especially in the highways where I was. The implementation part that Mr. Mathur alluded to is where I found there was a little bit of work to be done, and would request you to give us an idea as to how, as funds come in, how are we going to translate into ease of doing business in this aspect and kind of pave the way for a little faster movement in that, an easier movement in that. The second one, again related to what you spoke of, Pradeep ji. Lately, during our discussions in Moscow, two things emerged. BRICS is going to come into a lot of play now. It's going to be a playoff with G20 and BRICS both coming into the scene. IPSA is on one end, but the Russians are very keen to have us also brought into RIC. And there are issues over there which we know create a lot of geopolitical friction. We've been at pains to make them understand that it's not that easy and that a lot of things need to be ironed out and they need to come into this as well. Would you be able to give us some thoughts as to how we can play off RIC in the BRICS along with IPSA?
Thank you. The young man there. Go ahead.
So I'm Sumit. I'm working as a senior resident fellow at the Center for Computational and Economics. So my question is in relation to digital public infrastructure, and I'm rather curious about initiatives like, say, M-Seva or let us say ONDC. I mean, what is the government policy on? I mean, what is the what is the policy directive? Because there is a larger perception in the digital entities that when these initiatives are taken here, the government is acting more as a service provider than as a facilitator. Second, when we talk about Europe, right? So when we say that there is less innovation, the least we get there is that when we talk about big tech entities, even though these entities are based out of US, these entities at least fully comply with the legal regime there, and this can be seen across when we talk about commitment and settlement. These entities are willing to sit on the table across with the regulator and settle the allegations against them, but that's not the case. So in India, where an entity goes up to the Supreme Court even for as short as an interim relief. So yeah, if some thoughts can be shared.
Thank you.
So let me first say that G20 is not an answer to every crisis in the world and every challenge of India. G20 is not an answer to all that. G20 is uh, is important because it comprises of 85% of the global GDP and it comprises of about 80% of the trade. And therefore, it's a consensus making body. It's important because its voice counts when it says it decides something. The implementing arms are the UN and the uh, World Bank and IMF, and therefore its voice becomes important. So that's why it's important. Now, I think G20 should be looked at from the perspective of the fact that UN is, in today's world, is not able to take decisions. It's become a very complex body of 185 nations, which is not able to arrive at decision making. When the Security Council was envisaged, they'd never envisaged that one of the five members will be at a war for a protracted period of a long time, and the veto power will not work, and those are the challenges. Now, G20 is important because it's the only body which comprises of both the developed and the emerging markets. And the emerging markets have a role to play. When there's a financial crisis, G20 has acted in 2002 and 2008, and it's taken in the past, it's taken several important and critical measures, and they have worked. And that's why G20 is an important voice. There is a geopolitical challenge right now because there's a Russia Ukraine war going on. And the G7 in Hiroshima have taken a very strong stand against Russia. But the challenge for India is to bring everybody together and build a consensus. And that is important for India, that it should be much like what we played a key role in Bali to bring everybody around. And we drafted G20 is not a political body. It's important to understand that it's an economic body, and it takes uh, economic decisions. It takes decisions for growth, development, finance, but not on political issues. But the G7 uh, response to that is that the war in Europe is having an impact on food, fuel, and fertilizer. And therefore, politics has come into play. But when we drafted the agreement in Bali, we said that G20 is not a political body, but and therefore we went back and took the resolution of the United Nations, summarized that, and made it as para 3 of the Bali resolution. And para 3 and 4 were really drafted there in Bali by us, by India, to be able to push this through. And we, including the voting pattern. And therefore, on the politics of it, we fell back on the United Nations resolution. But it should focus on economics and on the issue of job. That's why I said that the most important issue is to push for resilient and sustainable growth over a long period of time. And to my mind, climate action is the biggest commercial opportunity which is coming, which is going to come in. If fossil fuel is going to be replaced by green hydrogen, that'll be the biggest commercial opportunity which India has to get into. And climatically, we are blessed to be able to do that. So those are new opportunities which will emerge in the world, new technological areas. Uh, the world is going to undergo a radical restructuring because of new global value chains emerging, because of this decoupling taking place, because of climate action. And I think it's India is well positioned to take good advantage of all this.
Thank you very much. Since Mithabji wishes to leave, yeah, no, I know. So I would like to thank you very much for this excellent interactive session. And can I request you to bring a flower? Let me give you a little memento. Here, Harsh Shingla. Thank you very much. This is. Can we please play Harsh Shingla's tape?
Shri Amitabh Kant, India's G20 Sherpa, Shri Pradeep Mehta, Secretary General, CUTS International, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Director General, RIS, distinguished guests and participants, friends, Namaskar and good morning. Let me at the very outset extend my heartiest felicitations to CUTS International on its 40th anniversary. CUTS International began its journey in 1983 as a rural development communication initiative. It has since expanded its activities to cover contemporary and emerging economic governance issues. I'm very happy that CUTS International has taken an interest in the G20 and is contributing significantly to the process through multiple channels, including as a part of the Think 20 initiative. Over time, I have been privileged to be associated with several of the initiatives that CUTS International has taken. One of these was a unique compilation of specific export promotion efforts undertaken by missions and posts abroad. I was fortunate to have known and worked closely with Sri Pradeep Mehta ji over a number of years. I have seen him constantly striving for excellence in his work and that of CUTS International. It is therefore not surprising that CUTS International today is one of the most prominent think tanks in our country with a global outreach. I thank Pradeep Mehta ji and his esteemed colleagues for inviting me to be part of this event on such a special occasion. Friends, The theme of my speech today is G20 and the Global South, how India is making a bridge between the North and the South. As you're all aware, India is midway through its G20 presidency, which we took over in December 2022. So far, we have hosted 119 meetings in 48 locations across the country. In all of these events, India's consistent endeavor has been to make sure that the voice and concerns of all, especially our friends in the Global South, are highlighted. One of the first meetings India organized after taking over the G20 presidency was the Voice of Global South Summit in January. As Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji said in his opening remarks to this conference, India's aim in organizing this was to amplify the voice, concerns and challenges faced by the Global South. India's choice of the theme of its G20 presidency, One Earth, One Family, One Future, is illustrative of our belief that the world can only progress if we all, the developed and the Global South, march forward together. India's broad G20 priorities include green development, climate finance, and lifestyle for environment, accelerated, inclusive, and resilient growth, accelerating progress on the SDGs, technological transformation and digital public infrastructure, reformed multilateralism, and women-led development. Each of these priorities has a bearing on the economic prosperity and well-being of all our partners, especially developing countries. For example, the need for green development and climate finance is most acutely felt by developing countries that have to balance their economic development with the imperative of green growth. Funds to finance green growth and technology is needed to accelerate the process without adding to the climate crisis is often the challenge. In his remarks to the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors in February this year, the Prime Minister stressed on the need for the G20's focus to be on the most vulnerable citizens of the world. He said, and I quote, "Only by creating an inclusive agenda will the global leadership win back the confidence of the world," unquote. The Prime Minister's call for an inclusive agenda for the G20 comes against the backdrop of multiple global challenges: a less than satisfactory recovery from the COVID-19 crisis, the overhang of the climate crisis, slowing progress on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the debt crisis, particularly affecting countries of the Global South, and the geopolitical crisis, with its attendant problems of food, fuel, and fertilizer shortages. Needless to say, much of the pain caused by these challenges is felt disproportionately by countries of the Global South. The enormity of these challenges may also serve as an opportunity to unite the world to act on these common problems by driving global consensus. India, as a G7 partner, a member of groupings like the BRICS, IPSA, and the Quad, holding the presidency of the SCO and the G20, and as the voice of the Global South, is in a unique position to contribute towards lasting and meaningful solutions to collectively address global concerns. One of the key outcomes of the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meet was the agreement on the language on debt resolution in the Global South. Among the beneficiaries of this G20 decision would be Chad, Zambia, Ethiopia, and Sri Lanka. At the G20 foreign ministers meeting in March, the reform of multilateral institutions to make them more responsive to the needs of the developing countries was a major area of discussion. Pointing out that the world order had undergone major changes since the Second World War, the outcome document issued after the G20 foreign ministers meet stated that the UN must be responsive to the entire membership. It underlined the need for a more inclusive and reinvigorated multilateralism and reform aimed at implementing the 2030 agenda. It also said that the G20 was supportive of further deepening cooperation between the G20 and regional partners, including Africa. Again, the outcome document spoke of the need for international cooperation, development cooperation, to be guided by the principle of equal partnerships, country ownership, tailored to national, regional, and local needs and circumstances, taking into account best practices and guidelines. This is clearly keeping our partners in the global south in mind, often seem to be trapped in deceptive and unscrupulous pacts that endanger their economic independence. This also comes in the face of the increasing debt crisis that many countries, especially in the global south, are facing. The G20 foreign ministers' statement also underlined the importance of reliable, sustainable, resilient, and quality infrastructure investment and addressing the finance gap to implement the 2030 agenda. Friends, as a major emerging market economy, India has developed some homegrown measures to boost financial inclusion, propel women-led development, and drive development and inclusivity. India stands ready to share its developmental best practices with the world through the G20 platform, including India's digital public infrastructure model that has helped our country achieve multiple national goals. These include economic growth, improved innovation and competition, financial inclusion, productivity gains, financial stability, digital sovereignty, and access to services such as healthcare, credit, and education. What is of particular note is that investing in digital public infrastructure can bring significant savings and productivity gains for governments in the long term. This is why the costs decline with the development of additional digital public infrastructure. India's digital transformation model can aid global digitization efforts. Globally, 4 billion people do not have access to digital identity, 2 billion remain unbanked, and more than 130 countries do not have digital payment systems. India has achieved more than 5 decades worth of digitization progress in just a decade and can help countries with their best practices. Another important area in which India could bridge the gap between the North and South through the G20 is by placing a focus on women-led development, where India's own track record in inclusive development can act as a model for the world. India's G20 presidency is working collaboratively across tracks to ensure gender equity. Some of the focus areas include inclusive employment, gender digital gap, financial inclusion, skill development, and health and social protection. Similarly, India's stress on millet cultivation can serve as an example for developing countries stressed by droughts and water scarcity due to environmental pressures. Millets are nutritious and they require less water for irrigation, thus being the possible answer to the twin problems of food and water scarcity among countries of the global south. Friends, traditionally, India has had a special relationship with the countries of the global south. Over the decades, India has consistently shared its developmental experiences with fellow developing countries. Despite being a developing country ourselves, we have extended development assistance worth $25 billion in the past decade, which is a 35% increase over the previous years. One of the most recent examples of partnering the global south was during the COVID-19 pandemic, when we supplied medicines and vaccines to over 100 countries. These are credentials that have been appreciated across the world, and I think they stand us in good stead as we move forward in our endeavors. As our Prime Minister has said, India stands always ready and willing to help countries of the global south in their developmental journeys in any way we can. In India, we strongly believe in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or one world, one family, one future. We believe in human-centric development, taking everyone on board as we travel collectively on the path to growth and prosperity. I thank you for your attention. Namaskar.
Thank Harsh Singla in absentia. And with that, we come to a conclusion. May I request Sachin, if you have any last words?
No, thank you. I once again congratulate you and your leadership at Cuts. Thanks for this excellent morning today, for bringing in more of discussions on how India is engaging with G20. But I'm so glad that Ambassador Harsh Shringla captured the essence of our presidency, which is to reach out to those who are not part of G20, and that's the global south. So I think we have captured that. I'm so glad that we could bring in civil society and with Ambassador Nambiar's presence, our commitment, our connect with civil society at GUTS, I think is most vital. Your own leadership on trade issues is here, so I'm glad that Hershey is here, and that connects us with trade issues. Last but not the least, I think, which is extremely important, is the element of gravitas in our trade analysis. Your contribution on competition policy has added when commission was not just there when you were talking about it. So Kutch has nurtured and has in a way initiated the nation to build those institutions which are extremely important, which are going beyond the binary of how we reduce tariff or how we increase tariff for trade advantage. You have taken the debate out of that context, and we have gone into what is called as deeper trade integration, and that's where I think Kutch's role is, and I congratulate you.
Thank you. Thank you. In fact, if you remember, Amitabh in his first remarks spoke about building competitiveness and reducing protectionism. This is something which we've been doing for a long time. Harsh, you want to have a say, a comment?
No, I wanted to seek some more information on what India, G20 under India's presidency is emphasizing very tangible kind of results in a number of areas. So, but the speech of Ambassador Shringla has highlighted many of them. The thought I had was that several of them, I hope, will come to fruition through the G20 process. But those ideas need to be more widely known so that initiatives by institutions like CUTS or other civil society organizations or think tanks can themselves take those forward through some kind of MOUs, through 3, 4, 5 country coalition, or links between, what they call 1.5 or track 2 initiatives, because the ideas which are being discussed under G20 right now, several of them have very practical impact, but they need far more than just decision or conclusion at G20 level. They need to be spread much wider.
Thank
So
you.
more information that would be helpful.
Thank you very much, Harsh. As I said, we are doing two projects, conceptualized two projects. One is on skills and the other is on climate resilient infrastructure over India, Brazil, and South Africa. So there is a continuum to the activities which have been done by the G20 so far. And how do we build a kind of a chain so that there is a better impact in what could be done?
Yeah. Can I just supplement? A lot of tools are getting known or being developed. So use of those kind of tools, knowledge of that, and building partnerships using that would be very useful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Would you like to give a memento to Sachin?
Thank you.
And Sachin, I look forward to working with you in the Center for Global South.
Yeah.
There are a lot, like DPI, for example. Digital public infrastructure is something which should be a primary agenda for this Center for Global South. So a lot of countries are asking us, by the way.
So yeah, we will
Yeah,
talk about it.
yeah. Thank you very much. Well, let me thank you all once again and to wish you a good day. Thank you.